Hey Kabibal, and welcome to our Philippine Professional Standard for Teachers Domain 1 Content Knowledge and Pedagogy webinar series. For the discussion this afternoon, our topic will be communication strategies for online classroom. Before we begin, kindly take note of the following reminders. Make sure you register to the webinar to have your e-certificate of participation. You may visit certificate.bibalgroup.com to generate your proof of attendance. Place your questions in the comment box allotted during the session and they will be addressed by a speaker later on. Share the video using hashtag LearnAs1PH as our official hashtag to our Bibal webinars. Experience learning, Kabibal. And now, to proceed with our webinar this afternoon, it is my pleasure to introduce to you our distinguished speaker. Mr. John Michael de la Paz, or Teacher Mike to his students, graduated with a degree in elementary education, teaching in early grades from the University of the Philippines, Diliman, magna cum laude. He then finished his MA in comparative literature, focusing on Philippine children's literature from the College of Arts and Letters in the same university. As a former faculty of UP College of Education, or UPIS, he has taught at the kinder, elementary, secondary, undergraduate, and graduate levels. After deciding to leave and learn outside the university, took the board licensure exam for teachers in March of 2018 and ranked first. For the past 9 years, he has been training teachers around the country with different organizations, most of which are projects with the Department of Education on on reading and literacy, storytelling, gender equality education, children's literature. Current, he is a teacher and assistant director of CHMCDC and is a technical training consultant for RTI International. Like most of you, he's still finishing his modules for his elementary students and is trying not to panic. He loves chocolate chip cookies, spaghetti, and sports. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Mr. John Michael de la Paz.
Hi, hello. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Ma'am, for that introduction. So I was a former training consultant for RTI. Currently, I'm doing training consultations for other small schools. Yeah. But let me just prepare my screen. So good afternoon, everybody. I'm so happy to be here with you, and thank you again, Vival, for having me. This is my fourth webinar with you folks. And our topic today is really, it's really conversational and casual. I know I can't really talk to you, but this is really about communication, and hopefully I mean sana talaga I could have showed you how communication can really work online. So we'll just have to make do with whatever I have in store for you this next hour. Okay, so pakilala lang ulit ako. My name is Teacher Mike, and Mike De La Paz. I finished my bachelor in elementary education and comparative lit. I'm a classroom teacher, and currently I'm an associate director for CHMCDC. It's a very small school, and also I'm doing training consultant. I'm a training consultant for different companies. I wanted to start with this because I just want you to focus on the idea that I am a classroom teacher, not just a trainer. And I know what's happening right now. I am teaching grades 1 to 6 online. Now, I may have a more ideal setup since I have less than 20 kids inside each class. But nonetheless, communication patterns and instances are happening every day. And hopefully, with this talk, I can share with you some technical stuff that you can use and also practical tips that you can use to make an effective or to facilitate an effective communication in your classrooms. Having said that, I also want to begin by saying that okay, your BAL teacher, teacher JM, teacher Mike, is somewhere in the middle of Gen X and Gen Z. I'm a millennial, meaning I'm starting with this because it's important to know that the Gen X, the teachers prior to us may have not are not probably or not perhaps very natural when it comes to using online things, gadgets and softwares and applications. On the other hand, our students, the ones we're teaching, are very very used to it, are so used to it that they don't know and they cannot imagine what life would be like without these gadgets and internet. So the good thing about me being a millennial, and a few teachers out there are also millennials, so we're in the middle. We know what it's like to have no internet or to have no gadgets or touch screens and whatnot. But we also know and are used to using gadgets, your tablets and your smartphones and the like, which can help us bridge that that information, that gap between the Gen X and the Gen Z. So we want to be able to help communicate with these generations, right? Yeah. So I just started with this because later on you'll find out communication. Part of communication is making things very personal, and so I just wanted to introduce myself to you. Okay. So we shall be talking about communication strategies for online classrooms, and in a span of around 50 minutes to an hour, I designed this slide deck and this webinar to be very casual and also to already pinpoint exactly the theories in communication that we already know or you probably know and apply it in online teaching. Okay, but nonetheless, we have to still review some concepts in communication. That will be our first part. And I'll be doing a juxtaposition of face-to-face and online classes to explore the online learning modality. And at the same time, I shall be giving you practical tips for effective online communication. And lastly, let's try to preempt miscommunication miscommunication instances that can happen inside your online classrooms. And these have been happening already in my classroom, and I have been really addressing these things, yung mga miscommunication nito, because we don't want miscommunication to happen, especially in this pandemic, and especially since we're using the online platform. Yeah. Right. So communication. So let's just go through some theories and concepts in it. So this is one of my favorite definitions by Julia Wood in 2006. So communication is a systemic process in which people interact with and through symbols to create and interpret meanings. So it's about interacting. It is a process, and we use symbols. Okay? And meanings are very important because we communicate to make sure that we understand each other and to also for us to be understood by others. So, in a very quick manner, communication is a process. It's systematic. It's symbolic. You have to be proactive and communication instances are individually interpreted. It's also irreversible and it involves communicators. Okay, so let's just go through them one at a time. Yeah. So communication is a process, right? Meaning there are steps through it. There are certain events that happen that leads to understanding, hopefully. But sadly, communication doesn't always end in understanding. That's why a lot of misunderstandings happen, especially when there's so many things happening within that communication instance or that communication uh, event. And so even if it's a process, it doesn't always end in understanding. But hopefully, ideally, it does, right? It's also systematic. So somebody creates the meaning, for instance, and then somebody sends that message in whatever form. For instance, in our situation right now, whenever we teach, we have to create that first, the curriculum, our lesson plan, and then we have to translate that into something that students can can understand, perhaps through your slide deck, perhaps to a module, perhaps to in an online synchronous lesson. And then you try to deliver that through your synchronous or asynchronous teachings. And then hopefully our students get that or understand and learn what we want them to learn. And to do that, we do assessment, right? So in all those steps, communication is happening and it's systematic because there are steps that you follow. And even if it's not like a rigid step by step pattern, there are steps that happen or events that happen for communication to occur. Now, it's also symbolic. And as you know, we're using words and we're using language to communicate. But again, it's not just the verbal communication that we're talking about. We're also considering nonverbal communication, especially in this online setup. And we'll talk more about that later. Next, it's also proactive and individually interpreted. For example, if I want to say something about a topic, even if I have that fixed idea already of what I want my students to learn, because the learners or our students are part of the interpretation, not all of our ideas will be understood or even will be absorbed by our students because a lot of things happen in their minds as well. Okay. So maybe they're, if you're talking about something very difficult, maybe they're not yet prepared to understand it. Or maybe if it's too easy for them, they might get bored and they may not listen. Okay. So there's that proactive aspect to it. Okay. So being part of that communication process takes an individual to, to help out construct the meaning that he or she is creating or getting from a communication instance. Next one, it's irreversible. Once you were, once you're, once you start saying things or once you utter things, you cannot take that back. You can say perhaps that it's wrong or you can correct yourself, but that instance that you said something cannot be reversed. Right? So, yun na yun. Pag nasabi mo na yun na yun. And because lalo na ngayon, in online learning, in a while, you'll learn, ang daming nawawalang interpretations, ang daming nawawalang meanings because of our modality and a lot of different kinds of noise. So we have to be very, very accurate or certain about what we want to say. Because again, it's irreversible. Once we say it or utter it, there's no turning back or taking it back. Okay. And lastly, it also involves communication, involves communicators. It's not just a listener and a speaker, not just a teacher and a student. Both of us, the teachers and the students, we become communicators. We can become a listener or a speaker and in different instances. But so it's not just us listening and speaking dynamic, it's more of we are all communicators. Okay. So I know this is very basic. You probably studied this in college, but it's important to understand and to just review these concepts because later on we'll be using these things. So, like what I mentioned earlier, you have your verbal communication and your nonverbal communication. So I just got this photo, sorry, this illustration from Thought Thought Company, Thoughtco by Hillary Allison. So these are some of your nonverbal communication. So balikan natin mamaya yung verbal communication. But ito sa nonverbal communication, this all these things are part of that. So haptics, sorry, I started proxemics. Proxemics talks about your proximity in how you manage or facilitate space, how you utilize space. Diba, when you're teaching inside the classroom, when you're teaching in front of the classroom, and you're very far from a student, sometimes if you want to get that student's attention, all you have to do is to use that space, use proxemics, and go nearer the student. And you, by using nonverbal communication, it's like you're already telling that person, that student, to listen, right? Haptics. Haptics has to do with touch. So, for instance, again, in the physical classroom, if you want to, call the attention of someone, you can just probably lightly tap his or her shoulder, or maybe just slightly tap on his or her table, okay, and or his or her hand. So there's that touch, right? So if you notice tong proxemics tsaka haptics, they're almost, well, except for haptics. Haptics is really totally out of the picture in online classes. Diba? So wala tayo, if you're teaching smaller, younger kids, walang kid na tatakbo sa'yo to hug you, diba? Walang ganon. It's really hard to tap someone's shoulder to get his or her attention because it's not just hard, it's impossible kasi nga, we are online. Okay? Proxemics, yes, wala rin. You can't really change the space. I mean, yes, you can probably drag and move around the windows, the frames or the video frames of your students, but it's not really a space that we use. It's not the same space that we use when we are inside the classroom, right? Vocalics includes all your intonation, your speed, how you say things, yan. Kasama yan, uh, yung mga yan sa vocalics. Okay. Also, yeah, chronemics has to do with time, right? Chronemics is problematic in online classrooms because your synchronous classes most of the time are very limited. You cannot really spend so much time because there's limited time. Hindi katulad before, di ba? Sometimes you extend, tapos okay lang, you can just ask your co-teacher, pwede po bang pahiram ng konting time? So hindi siya ganun. Because lalo na ngayon, di because of studies in psychology and we don't want our kids to be very screen dependent, we want them to minimize the time that they spend in front of a PC or a desktop or a phone, right? So yung chronemics na yan, medyo kailangan natin madaliin. Dapat sakto na talaga. So mabilis, like exact. So mamaya kasama dyan yung when we're being concise about things that we want to teach, right? Okay, let me just check something. Yan. Okay, so physical environment. Yeah, physical environment, we have no control. Don't have that much control. When we were in the classroom, in our physical classrooms, you have your arrangement of the chairs, the table, whatever seen on your whiteboard or your blackboard or your smartboard if you have one, the decorations in the school, in the classroom. Diba? Physical environment, it's really independent of us right now. Kasi nga bahay na nila yun, diba? So it's really more of their parents and their families controlling that physical environment for them. Okay, then you have your personal appearance yun. Yeah, even if it's online, maybe you're probably wearing shorts but wearing something more formal on top. But personal appearance, hindi ka rin naman magiging effective, right? If you are wearing a sando or your hair is really not fixed. I mean, obviously I don't have hair, but for those who have hair, di ba, hindi mo pwedeng magturo kayo online na hindi man lang kayo nag-ayos, di ba? Okay. Uh, ayan. So, and then you have your kinesics, your body motion, di ba? Kasama yung facial expressions, yung gestures nyo, even your posture and the like. Just to go back to vocalics, no, yung vocalics has more to do with the emotions or how you express yourself. So the emotions that you're using while you're using words. So non-verbal pa rin siya. So it's focusing on that one, the emotions and the like. Okay. So all of these are non-verbal communication types. But focusing on verbal communication, so you have this too. We can divide them into verbal communication and non-verbal communication, and also more specifically, vocal and non-vocal. So for verbal communication and vocal, you have your spoken language, which is vocal. Another word for that is just simply oral. So non-verbal communication naman, you're not using really words, but when you laugh, when you cry, when you cough, but those are already vocal, but non-verbal communication. Well, like when someone's noisy, but it's like saying, excuse me, why are you not listening? And ganyan. Okay. For non-vocal naman of verbal communication, you have your written language and your sign language. Okay, that's a different system of communication altogether. But my focus for this afternoon is really the spoken language and how we use the spoken language, the vocal, verbal communication, and non-verbal communication when we are in online classes. Kasi yung writing, that's a different story altogether. There are certain similarities and elements that written language use as a form of verbal communication, but again, mas iba yan kasi you can collaborate on that. There's more time to edit that, di ba? Mas controlled rin ang written language. And it needs more time kasi it also factors in the reading speed of the student and the like. Okay. So another example of that is your sign language. So let me just check my notes. Ayan. And then your non-verbal communication is also non-vocal, includes your gestures, body language, haptics, proxemics, and kasama nga dito yung kinesics and others. Okay. So, just to give you an example, this is from the University of Minnesota in their open library. Changing your tone greatly affects meaning. Like if you notice, if I read this, no, this table just shows you the emphasis, the placement of the emphasis, and how it changes the meaning. If I say, I did not tell John you were late, it's like saying someone else told John you were late. If you say, I did not tell John you were late, this did not happen. You're focusing on that negating word. And I did not tell John you were late. I may have implied it. So you're focusing on the idea na hindi ko naman talaga sinabi, but baka na-imply ko lang. Next one, I did not tell John you were late, but maybe I told Sharon or Jose. If you put the emphasis on you, I did not tell John you were late. I was talking about someone else. Or when I say, I did not tell John you were late. I told him you still are late. Or if you put your focus on, I did not tell John you were late. I told him you were attending another meeting. Okay. So you see that one. No? So kasama to, this is an example of also your vocalics, right? Yung speed mo, yung emphasis mo, and the like. So just with that nonverbal communication, you change meaning You change the meaning of the same sentence. So that one sentence has, at least in this table, has seven different meanings. So that's how it's very, sorry, that's how your tone can really affect or dramatically affect your meaning. And I'm focusing on tone because this is among those no, among those things that we study in nonverbal communication. Vocalics takes center, like front and center. It takes the most important. It becomes the most important among all the non-verbal communication types, simply because of online learning. Wala naman tayong proxemics, wala tayong haptics, di ba? Our kinesics hindi masyado, but yes, still, but tone talaga. Okay, yung boses natin, how we use it will really affect our online classes. Now, there are many communication models, but I think communication theorists and experts in speech communication really like the transactional model. It's very simple. So yan, so you have, di ba, comparing to linear, di ba? Yung linear kasi you have your speaker, then you have a message, and then you have your receiver or sender message, and you have a receiver. Yan. Ito yung transactional model. It's transactional, okay, because both communicators A and B, they have various different unique environments that they draw from to participate in the communication instance. So yan. Ideally, you have your message and then you have noise. Noise are examples of noise are yung distraction, no, na pwedeng maka-affect dun sa delivery of message, or it can affect the communication instance itself. So this is your transactional model by uh, uh, yeah, by a Barnland. Sorry, I forgot. Ayan. Now, I just tweaked it a bit, and this is just my own take on it, okay? Just to make it, just to help you imagine online communication. If you're going to use the same transactional model, the difference there is the noise that communicators experience are separate from each other. When I say noise, hindi lang to yung ingay ha. Anything that can be distracting, like your emotions, your physical state, may sakit ka, hindi ka masyado makapag-communicate mabuti, or even maingay sa bahay kasi nagtuturo ka, o kaya as a teacher, yan, may asong kumakahol, 'di ba? Marami yan. And o kaya biglang may dumaan na walang t-shirt sa likod mo and distracts the class. So those noise are unique to each, okay, to each of us. So, sa communicator A dun sa communicator B. Hindi katulad in the previous model, yung talagang original transactional model. The noise, because if you're talking in person, face to face, yung noise na yun ay same or almost the same for both of you. Right? So in a way, it's harder to control this noise because you don't see what the noise is in your student's house. And you don't really see everything that's happening there. Right? So at the same time, it doesn't stop there. That message, it has to go through a device or through a channel, and that also involves the internet. So your message already is being transported into different channels before it really reaches whoever you want to reach. In this case, our students. And our students who want to respond to us experience the same thing. Okay. So ang dami ng mas marami siyang factors. Okay, and then kasama na nga dyan is limited yung mga non-verbal cues natin. Okay. So this is how you can picture it. Okay, you can imagine it. Okay. So medyo it's more complicated. Okay. Now, so having reviewed those concepts, let's now go on and juxtapose or compare and contrast the online learning modality of face-to-face and online classes. How are they different? Okay, paano ba sila naging different? I already mentioned some of them. And so let's just focus on things that are very important. For example, if you're using Zoom as a video conferencing app, you have your breakout rooms and multiple meeting rooms, right? If you're using Google Meet, pwedeng multiple yung rooms na yun. You just have to open various tabs. Like I said, wala kang proxemics dyan. But for face-to-face, you can move learners around. Diba? If somebody's having a hard time looking at the board because he or she has poor eyesight, you can move that person or that student front. Kaya naman, sometimes when kids are really noisy or your students are noisy and it's distracting them, sometimes you pair them with someone who is a bit more, who has higher self-efficacy, who's more in control of himself or herself, para mas tahimik sila, they won't be rowdy or too rowdy. So you can move learners around. You can group them, you can change the layout, right? Sometimes whenever you shift from one quarter to another, you even allow them to change seats. So yan, wala yan. Kasi sa kanila, ang pwesto lang nila is yung nasa bahay sila, kung ano man yung study area nila. Like what I mentioned earlier, for online classes, you have limited nonverbal cues. So like what I said, ang priority mo dyan is voice and visual feedback. When you talk about visual feedback, you really have to see what's happening in your screen. Right? Not just in your screen. When I say in your screen, what's happening among your students. Okay, what's happening in there and that limited screen that you see. Okay? Tama? So you have to have the visual feedback. Makikita mo pa rin naman if the student is bored, if it's not, he or she is not listening. So, yun yung mga focus mo na lang. For face-to-face, mas marami. You have your space, in haptics na yung space. Proxemics yung space, and you have your gestures, part of kinesics, then you have your vocalics and your voice, and then your haptics. Mas marami. So, in a way, mas madali rin sana mag-facilitate ng learning if it's face-to-face because you have more non-verbal cues. Mas madaling mag-facilitate ng effective communication. Right? Now, this is very important. There's that duality of communication channels when you're doing online. So when you say duality, meron kang chat box, and then you have that camera, your video, and then you also have, if possible, if you have an ideal setup, you have a lecturer, and then you have a moderator. That moderator is probably watching your students. So in this example, for example, in this example where I'm giving you a webinar, I think Miss Michelle and Miss Sandra are moderators, and I'm the lecturer, right? And so they might be assisting me by looking at what's happening, kung ano nangyayari din sa YouTube channel, right? Because I don't see you, although I can. I'm checking lang kung nakikita ko. Ay, sorry. Ayan. So I can check that, right? So pwede yun i-check. Yeah. So you have your moderator and lecturer. So that's the duality or the channel of communication. Sige, let me just check anong nangyayari sa ating. Yeah. So katulad ngayon, I'm using Zoom. Let me just stop for a while just to check kung anong nangyayari sa chat box. Ayan. Usually, good afternoon. I'm watching from Plaridel, Bulacan, Sorsogon. Ayan. So, yan. So, diba? So, I can watch that. So, there's the duality to it. I'm looking at my camera. I'm talking to you, but also I can watch what's happening in the chat box. And usually, puro good afternoon naman sila. Ayan. Wala pa namang umaangal sa kintab ng noo ko. Ayan. But anyway, yeah. So you have to be aware of that duality because you have to maximize that. Okay, yung chat box mo, tsaka yung mismong visual gadget mo, your camera and your video conferencing app. Now, for face-to-face, it's really singular. Wala namang nag-chat habang nagkaklase kayo unless you're doing blended learning and then you have, for example, you're in a computer class, there's the teachers there in front, but also the chat box is open just in case may mga nagko-computer lab kayo, tapos pwede nyo i-chat yung prof nyo. So, pwede yun. But most of the time when we're teaching in our classrooms, it's really singular. Okay? Yeah. Now, so let's focus on online pa. Other things. So you have your digital ecosystem. Yan, digital ecosystem, it helps facilitate effective communication. Like how do you communicate with each other? Let's talk about that later. Yan, may documentation differentiation. In online classrooms, you can easily record things. Kung allowed kayo sa school niyo mag-record or may capacity kayo to record your lessons, then hindi niyo siya kailangan ulitin. You don't have to repeat it. If somebody misses it, you just have to send that student the missed class or the video of the missed class. There's also the flexibility in time and distance. For example, in distance, teachers who are not in Manila, for example, can still teach classes or schools that are based in Manila, even if they're abroad, right? So actually, this is a good time. Well, if you're in a private school, this is the good time to work with experts. They can handle smaller, some subjects. So may mga subject matter experts ka ganyan. Sorry, mali lang yung spelling. Also, students far from the school, right? So sometimes in our school, for example, meron kaming wala naman sa Manila ngayon, nasa province kasi na-stuck because of the lockdown. So they can still continue school. So there's the flexibility and distance. Flexibility in time, if you're doing modular or even synchronous and asynchronous lessons, you can move a deadline. For example, you can assign an assignment. Like today, kunyari, nagka-class tayo right now and I assign you a homework and then I tell you you have until Sunday to make it. or to do it, then there's that flexibility in time. Because most of in face to face, usually in an hour tapos na lahat ng tasks, homework na lang, right? So pero in online learning, in online communication, you can explain a task and then ask them to continue it after the class. Now, there's also the introvert's chance, and we'll talk about this more later because mas may chance yung introverts. And there's this concept, the disembodiment of a person online, in online conversations and online communication. Let's talk about that in a while. Yan, so makikita nyo rin sa communication, no, you can focus on personality and social skills if it's face-to-face. It's easy. It's easier, the organizational skills. Kasama na rin dyan, syempre, if you're I think one of the hardest things, the hardest population to teach right now are children with special needs or children who are struggling with their learning because it's hard. It's hard to really teach them from a camera because again, it's very important that you're there for them. So it's really difficult, and I think a lot of you would agree, especially if you're teaching children with special needs or exceptionalities. Yeah, this is another thing. In face to face, it's easier to simulate students' thoughts and interests because you're there, right? You're there and you're physically there. Your physical presence is there. We'll talk about presence in a while. So online kasi it's not there. They can easily just turn you off or shut down their computers or even leave the room. Tapos na, di ba? Modification for students' needs are also easier if it's face to face because it's you can address your cognitive and emotional needs at once. Okay? Kasi kunyari, pag may umiyak doon sa online classes natin, you can't really be there for that kid and try to help him or her. Yeah. So it's hard. It's harder for online. But both have strengths that should have in the hands of a teacher. Sorry for the typos. Okay. So now let's go to practical tips and strategies for online communication. So bibilisan ko lang to. I have around 30 minutes left. So this is what I mentioned a while ago. In online classrooms, you have to think of the disembodiment. When you say disembodiment, this is transcending the body constraints in cyberspace. Meaning, these are things na pag disembodied ka na, it's like nawawala yung mga nandun naman usually kapag physically present ka. For example, in a face-to-face classroom, if I'm an introvert, like I mentioned earlier, if I'm an introvert, I think I'm an introvert, hindi lang halata. But I said introvert, when I want to recite, for example, and there are 30 classmates or 29 classmates, kung 30 kami, imagine all of those students are giving off non-verbal cues. So that's why students who are introverted may have that anxiety because their eyes are on her, or on him or on her. The teacher's eyes are on him or on her. So nawawala yun kapag online. Kasi pag online, it's just a screen. That's why there's a disembodiment. Okay. Now there are good things and bad things about that. Like I already told you the good thing. One of the good things about the disembodiment in online presence or in cyberspace is that there's lessened nonverbal cues. Because if you're just focusing on your teacher, for example, online, then you wouldn't mind the nonverbal cues happening in your classmates' cameras or frames or windows. Ba? Nawawala yun. So nakafocus ka lang. So if you also notice, it also helps that you have a microphone, your students have a microphone, so yung mga mahirap magsalita, when I say hirap, mahina magsalita. Di ba in usual classroom kasi there's the issue of proxemics na pag malaki yung room, and then you have to modulate your voice for the teacher to hear, nakaka-pressure rin yun. Kasi what if ganun talaga yung boses mo? But with the help of, your microphone, you don't even have to shout or to make your voice really loud. Okay. So there's that disembodiment. So may advantage. Okay. Nawawala yung minsan nagko-cause ng anxiety for students. However, there's also a bad thing. One of the bad things in one study on this embodiment is that kapag whenever there's no nonverbal cues, right? There's also limited communication, right? Once they're done with the synchronous lesson, there's that feeling of loneliness. So after nun, wala na akong kausap. I'm alone. Right? So that there's solitude and isolation. Unlike when you're in face to face after a class and then you go to recess, for example, you're excited because there's recess, you can go to the playground, you can eat lunch with your friends. So there's that concept of togetherness. But because of online classrooms, there's that disembodiment that after you shut down that computer, You don't have anyone with you. You're with your family, but it's not the same being there with your friends and classmates. And that's why online presence is another key idea that I want you to get from this talk. Online presence is how can you make your students really feel that you're there, even if I am just, for example, I'm a teacher right now. I'm just a bald head in your laptops. Probably some of you are doing something else while listening to me. Probably I'm just playing or I'm droning out. Sorry, I'm just saying things and no one's listening. Diba? But as a teacher or someone who's talking or facilitating, at least I should make my online presence felt. Okay. So we want to reduce the relational distance and increase instructor presence. What's relational distance? Relational distance is the idea that you are far from the teacher. Okay? The fact is the teacher is in school, I'm at home, we're very far. So relational distance yun. Malayo naman talaga kasi physically. But to augment that or to lessen that feeling of distance, you can focus on increasing instructor presence. And how do you do this? Look at this one. So you can use your avatars, for example, or your mga emojis. So I'm teaching here, I'm writing a sentence, teacher JM is bald, and then I give them a chance to, I did this, I used the annotate function in Zoom, and then I told them to give me hair. Diba? I know this is just for kids, but for older learners, pwede nyo pa rin gawin, you can still think of something that can make you more personally there, even if it's just superficial. Kahit na wala ka naman talaga dun. The fact that they can somewhat interact with a symbol of you, like in this case, my avatar. And then they can draw hair on my head. Then my online presence is increasing. Right? Okay. So ayan. Now, aside from that, you have the 7 C's of communication. And you've studied this probably, so dadaanan ko lang sila. Having said that, with this embodiment and online presence in mind, you should also consider the 7 C's of effective communication in an online course. But this is by Venerable. Yeah, it should be clear, coherent, complete, concise, correct, concrete, and courteous. I'll be focusing on 4: clarity, conciseness, concreteness, and courtesy. Okay, let's focus on this 4. Kasi iba, it's a bit self-explanatory naman. But for clarity, specifically in online communication, you have to make sure that whatever you're saying is not open to various interpretations. If you want your students to learn an idea, make it as simple as possible. In classrooms, in one technique in pedagogy is you want to draw it out from the students, right? So sometimes you spend time na sila talaga yung makaka-realize, right? But because you're doing online classes and you have limited time, you have to minimize those. So you can't do that every day, that you're trying to draw everything from the students. What you can do is to draw some, when you say draw, yung sila yung makaka-realize, they will be the ones realizing what the lesson is all about or what the concept is all about. You can do that from time to time. That's important. But more often than not, you have to make sure that your priority is clarity. So you want to make sure that yun nga, the various interpretations are minimized. So they really get what you need them to learn. And thus that connects to being concise, less is more. I know in the Philippines we tend to be so paano ba? We're grade conscious and our concept sadly in the Philippines is the more kids know, the smarter they are or the better their education is. But actually it's not really true all the time. So you can bombard a lot of students in the Philippines are bombarded with so many data, but the quality and the depth of how they use these ideas, uh, it's not really as deep as you want them to be or want them to understand that. So lalo na sa online, don't don't force your students to learn everything that they must have learned in or they could have learned in a physical face-to-face classroom. Right? Kaya nga tayo may most essential learning competencies by the DepEd or whatever private school you are in, your school made sure that they had to select the most important as well. Okay? So less is more. So be concise. Next one, you have to be concrete. When you say concrete, this is not the concrete na you have to, show it like a real object or a realia. It's more of you want to be specific, definite, and vivid. Because you're not there. Again, wala kang proxemics, wala kang haptics, wala kang masyadong kinesics. limited lang yung kinesics mo. You want to make sure you're specific, definite, and vivid. You want to describe things that as you want them to be imagined by your students. So don't be vague in general. Okay? So i-targetin nyo na talaga. Sabihin nyo na talaga yung gusto nyo sabihin ng diretsa. Okay, ng explicit, diretso, or explicitly. Okay? And to do that, you have to be specific, definite, and vivid. Now, courtesy is also important. You also have to ask for your students' opinion on how to improve the communication. Okay? Because for one, the Philippines was not really ready for this kind of online setup. It was thrown upon us teachers. So even if you're a private school and you have a lot of budget and you were able to transition nicely, we could have still prepared better if this was something that we already planned before, right? And so you have to ask for your students' opinion because even us as teachers, this is new to us. Okay, and this is really new to your students as well, and there's already that anxiety, and so you want your students to be part of the learning process so you can ask their opinion how to improve communication, right? Yan, so importante yan. So by the way, if you have questions, don't be shy, just type it there. I think our friends from Vibal will be taking note of them. And yet maxim okay, so now we have here the essentials for online teacher student communication. We want to remember these things because this is the basis of good communication. Number one, you maximize different modes of communication. Number two, you want to create an effective communication system. Sorry, this should be number three. Number three, convey the right tone of voice. And lastly, make your communication personal. So let's try to see this and one at a time. No? Number one, you have to mix different modes of communication. So essentially, you have your video for video conferencing. You also have your audio. You can be it can be your audio clips or even podcasts or when you're talking while there's a video, like what I'm doing right now. And then you also have your text, your email, and your live chats. In fact, live chats are more rampant these days because, like what I said kanina, diba, it's a disembodiment. So this embodiment where your students feel alone when they're done with the synchronous classes, they tend and they should actually, it's a good thing that they find camaraderie and togetherness and belongingness in chat groups. So yung mga students natin lalo na sa high school, yung mga upper grades and even college, they'll survive in live chats. Kasi live chats will continue the sense of being part of a class during your synchronous classes. Okay. So, but to also do that, no, you have to make sure that you have your learning system, your learning ecosystem. So if you're with Vibal, you have their V Smart School to facilitate this, no, kung ano man yung mga pwede nyo gamitin, video, audio, and text. And meron naman silang tips for you, right? But you can create your own lessons, monitor students' attendance, compute and display grades. So all of these things, it focuses on the learning, but actually behind this, it's the communication, right? How do you communicate learning and facilitate learning to that? For example, another example, kunyari, learning ecosystem mo, ito. So, you maximize each one. Ano yung mga pwedeng gamitin? Tapos yung mga connections, like if you're using a Gmail, tapos yung Google Classroom, just in case lang. If your calendar, diba? If you're using Google Meet, tapos pwede mong i-connect sa YouTube, or if you're using Zoom, diba? Yung mga yan. Pwedeng kunyari, Zoom ka and you have a big class, tapos kapag one-on-one na, you can turn to Google Meet, just in case you want that. So you just have to make sure that you maximize and you vary the types of communication that uh, you can use. Ayan. Okay. Simple. Ito, video. If you want to check it out, I volunteered with the Office of the Vice President. So VP Lenny Robredo made this free videos. It's free for everybody. I'm on episode 22. Yan, pagpasensyahan nyo ng aking mga pisngi. Yan. So ito, sample to, diba? This is a video and you can play this. This also increases physical presence because it's clear, the lighting's good. This was created by C Hub. It's a studio, a professional studio, and yeah, so you can watch that on YouTube. Pero because I have videos for my students as well, kunyari sample lang to. Then they have the physical presence that every time that you want to see your teacher and review the lesson, they can simply play it, and then it's like you're there with them, talking to them. I'm looking at the camera, I'm focusing on them, even if I'm not there. So ito na naman yung online presence, right? Yan. So yan, you can watch it at epektibong pagkikwento. Yan. Number two, you have to create an effective communication system. There are four things I want you to consider. How will the teacher communicate with students and families? Okay, so dapat maayos yan. Do they talk to you through email? Do you have a chat group with them? Do you still send physical correspondences or actual letters? Yung mga ganun. So you have to make sure that that's very clear. Right? Number two, when will the teacher communicate? In here, you have to establish a routine. When will you be sending modules, for instance? When will you be available to talk to? When will you have synchronous classes? Ba? Kung may synchronous classes kayo, dapat malinaw pa rin yung schedule. And then, when can they consult with you during asynchronous classes, right? So, importante dito, it's very vital that you still have a routine for that communication. How can they reach you? That's the next one. How can students and families communicate with you? Are you comfortable giving out your cell phone number, your email? Do you have a professional school email, and then you have your personal email? Do you want to be, do you want to be invited in a Zoom chat if the parents want to talk to you, or if the students want to talk to you? Will you be available on that? Will you be adding them in Facebook? Yeah. So you have to be very clear with that. Next, how and where will you address personal or sensitive topics? Remember, in online classrooms, hindi ka pwede. You cannot spend your limited synchronous time addressing misbehavior or distracting issues or fights and whatnot. Kasi mauubos yun. Kawawa, also, it's going to be sad for those students who are there to really, or who are ready to listen and learn, if you're going to spend that time reprimanding someone. And that's why you can't also be mad on an online class. Once you get to that mad point, the tipping point, you lose a lot of your lose a lot of your ethos as a speaker. Kasi nakikita ka nila, napapanood ka nila. It's just like they're watching a movie na may nagagalit, right? And they can easily, like what I said earlier, put you on mute or just turn off their computer. So you don't want to be mad in an online class, lalo na if it's a group class. Now, if there are things that you really have to address, like may umiyak, for example, or somebody felt bad or somebody fought, then you still maintain your composure, and then you schedule a separate communication, a separate video conferencing for them if possible. Okay, because you have to address that. Okay, I'm not telling you to forget about that. You just have to address that on a personal note, like in a smaller number. Kunyari, kung one-on-one lang kayo or dalawa lang silang bata na nag-away and you, kasi these are personal or sensitive topics. Okay. Number three, you have to convey the right tone of your voice. I said this, no, part of vocalics as well. So you have to use emotive language. So, like, I don't know if you're getting it from me, but I try to make it really, kind of medyo mabilis ako magsalita, but I want it to be a bit livelier. So I'm trying to be more emotive. I mean, showing my emotions. I'm showing if I feel sad na may nag-away na bata kanina, di ba? Or, I'm excited to be here with you guys. So you have to be very emotive and even animated as you speak. When you say animated, the students will you're allowing the students to feel what it is you're trying to tell them, right? Then don't be afraid to use your GIFs and emojis. It's not GIFs. I think ano na yan. Settle na yan. GIFs talaga sila. Tama ba? Yeah. Yan. So, graphic interchanging format, if I'm not mistaken. Anyway, and emoji. So don't be afraid to use those because emojis and GIFs can help students really see what you're feeling. Just in case hindi ka ganun ka-animated magsalita, or very monotonous ka pa magsalita, then maybe your emojis can clarify what it is you're saying, the feeling or the thought or the emotion behind what it is you're saying. And of course, teachers, even if you're chatting with your students, as teachers, you have to observe proper language and grammar. Okay, I know parang it's counterintuitive to use emojis with formal language, but you can still use, emojis and GIFs while still making sure that you spell words correctly or that you spell it out. Hindi ka mag-shortcut masyado. Because you're already modeling rin. It doesn't matter if you're a language teacher or a Filipino or English teacher. You're still a teacher, so you have to model proper language and grammar. Okay. Next one, you have to make your communication personal. Okay, so you want to spend time to talk about things. This is very important. If you want to have a very effective uh, communication patterns or communication instances inside your online classrooms, you have to be personal about it. So use names, You can also do self-disclosure, meaning you tell things about you, what's happening about you, or in your life as a teacher in online classes, 'di ba? Hindi lang puro yung lesson lang. 'Di ba? Like for example, sometimes uh yeah, like what did you do over the weekend? Same things that we sometimes do. You're supposed to also do this rin naman talaga in face to face. But in online it's more important. You self-disclose. What do you do? What's happening in the life of teacher JM or teacher Mike? Right? So you also have to do off-topic chat. Because when you spend time to talk about things outside the class, it's also like you're checking on each other and you're giving them a sense of togetherness. Okay, so in my classes, although right now I'm only teaching 1 to 6, in the past few months, anong summer I've been training adult learners for DepEd and RTI. So kahit ano pang level yan, talking about something outside the topic or your lesson will really make your communication patterns more personal, and thus making the entire communication experience more effective because there's a sense of togetherness. Okay? So you don't want to alienate and isolate. Remember, may disembodiment na nga, di ba? And you want to lessen that disembodiment. You want to lessen the isolation that kids or students get from that disembodiment. So sample, sometimes these are my sixth graders. So what I did was or obviously, kunyari, my kids know I'm bad, and I'm proud of it. I don't hide it, so I make it personal. So one time I put googly eyes on my forehead, drew a nose and a mouth randomly, and then put my eyeglasses on top, right? And it made them smile. And at the same time, it started that way na, sorry, it started the day or that online class in a very light manner because they know that their teacher knows the teacher has humor, the teacher wants to make them laugh and the like. So I'm making it more personal, diba? Yeah, personal. Bakit to making it more personal? Kasi nga, again, I'm identifying the idea that I'm bald, I don't have hair. And I'm embracing that. And I'm already modeling how you can be confident as a teacher who's bald. Well, at the same time, you're talking about yourself, not taking yourself too seriously. Okay. So our last part, just in time, is the fourth one, which is preempting miscommunication. So there are possible miscommunication instances in an online classroom, and believe me, as a teacher is doing it right now, ang dami na talaga nitong miscommunication na to. And sometimes it's really sad, but again, our goal is not to be so sensitive about it, but be proactive about it. We don't want to, to parang to end with parents na miscommunication tapos na. Sayang, diba? I know sometimes parents can be taxing, they can be toxic, and you know, they can be really mean sometimes. But we don't want that. We don't want to end relationships with parents. That's the saddest thing you can do as teachers, diba? So you want to make sure that you try to preempt these miscommunication patterns and address them as early as you can. Ano ba mga negative aspects of online platforms that can be the source of miscommunication and uh, not ideal communication instances? Number one, presence. Are they really there? Focus natin masyado as teachers. Nandiyan ba talaga yung estudyante ko? Nakikinig ba talaga sila? Are they even listening to me? And sometimes you want to be OC about it. Diba? I read somewhere in Twitter, like a school, I don't know which school, but somebody just took a screenshot of it. Parang they just want to make sure that when somebody's taking a quiz, the one hand is like writing or typing, and then if you're not using the other hand, you have to put it here just to make sure that both of your hands are there and it's not doing something else. Diba? Yes, if you want to do that, let's go ahead. But that thing, when you're very, very strict about everything, it's forming a sense of distrust. And when you don't trust your students, it's a reason for them to not communicate effectively with you. Diba? So, yeah, importante yan. So, question is, are they really there? And then the converse of that is also true. Is the teacher also really there? Like, yes, I know my students can see me teaching, but am I really there? Do I really care about them? That's why you have to increase your online presence. Okay. Again, another thing, misinterpretation and meanings lost. Again, like I told you earlier, diba? Because communication is proactive and it's individually interpreted, a lot can a lot of the things you say that you want them to learn or to get can be misinterpreted or it can be lost. So that's why you have to be very clear and you have to be very concise. Then nandiyan rin yung isolation and loss of motivation. Right? Isolation, like what I said, because of the disembodiment, it's like I'm not in a classroom anymore. My friends are not here. I may be in an online class, but They're very far from me, so it's really hard to feel that you belong and you're there with them. And because of this, you can also lose your motivation. So there's loss of motivation. Okay. And you don't want that. If your students do not are not motivated to learn, you can't expect an effective communication instance and pattern. And next one is emotions lost or confused. Emotions are so hard to watch or to be aware of in online classes, especially for the younger kids. Okay, even for upper grades and high school, all our students are going through something. The pandemic is causing us a lot of anxiety and stress. And so emotions can be high, emotions can be, parang nasa almost tipping point. So anything na mangyaring masama, something bad happens, you get disconnected, you get frustrated, or worse, you're just lazy, you don't feel like learning. Okay, so emotions mo it gets lost sometimes, right? And thus, borrowing from Kunin, I'm sure teachers here, you know what witness is, diba? Your eyes in the back, you can see everything. You should apply this to online witness as well. So, if only if you have budget, it's really better if you have two monitors. If you have two monitors when you're teaching, because you want to make sure you're seeing everything, all of your students. Kung kaya mo pang tatlo kasi malaki yung class mo, go ahead. Para tatlo yung nakikita mo. You're seeing everything because you might not notice what's happening. Like for example, yesterday I was teaching a grade one class and it was going smoothly. And then suddenly, before I knew it, when I clicked on the next set of students in the screen, nasa sahig na yung estudyante ko. He was laughing and his chair was overturned. So parang, oh my goodness, if something bad happens, you don't want that kid to be hurt. And you're not there to help him, right? Or to help her. Ganun rin sa emotion. Sometimes you get frustrated when you don't call them and the like. So you just have to make sure you have that witness, okay, or awareness of what's happening everywhere. So I just have here last 5 slides, 5 case studies. Number one, ito, ano gagawin mo? The child and guardian feel frustrated that they cannot enter the video conferencing app. They're frustrated. And sometimes parents would think na, and I experience this, not everyone ha, sometimes they would think na hindi mo sila pinapapasok and they can be sensitive about it. But again, remember they're already frustrated and it's the internet's fault. The Philippines has really a bad internet connection in Southeast Asia, in the world. We have the slowest internet providers kahit na mahal na yung binabayaran natin, right? So you have to think about how to address this, right? Okay? Kaya wag yun na sabay ng frustration. If you're frustrated as teachers, chances are, you know what, it's not going to be a good, effective communication pattern between you and the parents. Okay, study two. The learner loses interest since the teacher does not call her or him. Right? So if you can, make sure to try to call everybody in a synchronous class. Kung kaya lang. Kasi pag marami naman, hindi naman talaga kaya. But when you call someone and get to converse with that kid or that student, it improves motivation. It increases motivation and thus more interest as well. Okay, so the three, while the student is talking, the teacher moves on to another student. Apparently, the student's video froze. The student feels the teacher cut him or her off. Yun, minsan, akala ng estudyante, hindi mo na siya pinansin, kinot mo na lang siya, you move to another student. But in fact, her or his video was laggy. So, you thought it was just frozen. So, you just called someone else. So, lahat to nangyayari and it affects our communication patterns, right? Yung lag, yung mga misinterpretation, feeling nila you're not minding them, yun pala, frozen na sila. Another one, while having a lesson, a student is playing games in her or his phone. Right? How can you communicate effectively with a student who's distracted? Right? So, yes, sa simula pa lang, you really have to have trust. You have to build trust. Like, what will happen if you don't listen? Uh, hindi ka papagalitan. What will happen if you don't listen is you won't learn. And if you won't learn, sayang naman yung time mo. If you really don't want to learn, paano yun? Sayang lang. Edi, wag ka na lang sumali. Something like that. Of course, you don't say that, but you know what I mean. This is distractions like this is really happening. And how do you address that? So if I were you, hindi ko na rin i-OC sarili ko. You won't be shouldn't be so conscious about it. You try your best to build a community of trust that they're going to listen even if no one's watching them. Okay. Because this will really happen. And lastly, students are arguing. It happens because of that this embodiment. They want to continue belongingness outside the synchronous classes. Students might fight in a chat box outside synchronous classes. So there's communication there again. How do you deal with that? How do you address that? Well, at least you have to be aware about those things, and your students will probably tell you about these things anyway. Or if not, you have to really also know para aware kayo ng nangyayari. So all of these will really contribute and affect your communication patterns when you are in a synchronous online class. Okay? So with that, maraming salamat po. I know I have some time for questions, but if you have questions, you can email me there, jmt.telepas@gmail.com. I also have a very humble, small YouTube channel where I try to upload resources for teachers. That's Teacher Mike's Classroom. I'm also at GUI Mike at Twitter and Instagram. And that's it. Yeah. So thank you so much po.
Thank
I'm
you very
Michelle.
much, Sir Mike. Now we'll proceed po with our question and answer
Sure,
po.
sure
The
po.
first one po is there. The first one po is from Mr. Al Cameron Avila. How can we ensure that we can still get the nonverbal cues of our students during online class? Thank you po.
Thank you. Sorry, ano pong pangalan ulit, ma'am?
Al Cameron po.
Ma'am, si teacher Al Cameron. Yeah. Uh, yes. So one very practical tip is you want to make sure that may gallery view ka. I don't know kasi kung ano yung video conferencing app yung ginagamit nyo. But if it's Zoom, for instance, it's better really to have another monitor, like a secondary monitor, so you get to see them. Okay. Or also, when another way to improve on that is when you're discussing something, it's better to be in gallery view na wala naka-share screen like what I'm doing right now. If this was my class, we would all be in a gallery view and we will be talking to each other. I'm not going to be even on spotlight. I'm not going to be a I'm not going to be the biggest one. Everybody will be seeing each other. That is if everybody has good internet connection and can use their video cameras. Yeah. I hope I answered that.
Thank you po, sir. We'll proceed to the next question po from Mr. Peter Domingo. What are the risks po of communicating online, especially with the parents of our learners?
Sorry, what's the first one? What are the
What are the risks po of
risks?
yes po, of communicating online, especially with the parents of our learners?
Okay. Okay. That question kasi has ano has a background to it. I think you're asking that because during face-to-face classes, we don't really communicate that much, 'di ba, online with parents, 'di ba? Among schools, it's something that we discourage teachers from doing, 'di ba? Communicating all the time online. Kaya lang kasi the online classroom, the classroom setup online is a different thing altogether. You really have to communicate. So if you're going to talk about risks, number one is your privacy and also your control of time. Kasi some parents, if you don't clarify it to them, they would sometimes call you or text you ng gabi na o kaya sobrang aga. Kaya sometimes while you're having a class, biglang gusto ka nilang tawagan, yung mga ganun. So those are some risks. Okay? But I think the better question to ask is how do we make sure this is an effective communication pattern with how do we have an effective communication system with the parents? So so you make sure na you clarify the time, how or also how they can reach you and the like. So But to answer your question, risks include yun nga, they forget to respect your time. They might invade your privacy whenever they scroll or maybe if they stalk you on Facebook or so make sure medyo okay ang mga online accounts and whatnot. I hope I answered that.
Thank you po, sir. The last question po is from Miss Annie Yambot. How to manage negative aspect between parents without knowing on gadgets?
Ooh, well, I love that question. I believe me, one of the stresses right now of teachers are parents who are not so good with gadgets. Tapos, worse, syempre huwag niyo akong isumbong, pero baka may nanonood na parents. Pero hindi na nga sila masyadong magaling sa gadgets, galit pa sila. But you have to understand that they are frustrated. So hindi natin sila pwede sabayan. I personally feel frustrated sometimes, especially when they're mean or they're rude. So, how do you address that? First, you try to relax. Okay, don't talk to them when you're mad and you're also frustrated. and then you try to call them. If you can teach them, I teach them. So kaya as a teacher, for example, I made sure that the school I'm working in, we really trained the parents. So hiwalay pa yung training ng teachers dun sa parents para alam talaga nila yung nangyayari. But even after that, marami pa rin parents yung they really cannot understand it yet. Again, di ba Gen Z, Gen X, sure. Yeah. So medyo mahirap talaga kasi hindi natural yung gadgets. So first, you have to be calm. Next one, you have to be patient. And third, you have to be explicit how to teach them. So kung kaya nyo mag-screen share, kaya nyo silang tawagan, then do that to lessen the tension. Yan. Ayun po.
Thank you so much, Sir Mike. That's all the questions that we have for now. Any last reminders to our viewers for today, sir?
Right. Okay. Well, happy Friday night to everybody. Thank you so much for spending your time this afternoon with me. For online communication, just make sure you try to make it personal and you try to make it safe. When you make your students feel safe, they will really be more motivated to talk to you and to reach out to you, and that will really help your teaching in the process. And so I hope you enjoy online learning. Wala, ito na tayo. And you just enjoy it, but also be calm and just relax and chill. Don't lose your composure and just be there for the kids. So, yan. Maraming salamat po sa inyong oras.
There we have it. In behalf of Wibald Group Incorporated, I would like to thank you, Sir Mark, for being our speaker for today for this insightful learning session. Truly, our viewers really enjoyed your session this afternoon. It is
Thank you, Ma'am
honor
Michelle.
It is an honor to have you with us today, sir. And to all our Kabibel viewers, all thanks to you for your continuous patronage to our daily learning session. We encourage you to subscribe and watch on our official Vival Facebook page and YouTube channel. Muli maraming salamat at magandang araw sa ating lahat. Bye, everyone!